Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is the 9th of December 2024. These are the stories that we'll be highlighting, deciphering, understanding during the course of our show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the situation in Syria. We know that Assad's government is more or less gone. In fact, Bashar al-Assad is gone. He has gone to Moscow. And it is being said that most of the ministers currently present in the previous government are still functioning, but till when will they continue function is a question. Then there is the whole escalation, whether it be in the Golan Heights, whether it be in other parts of Syria. Is Israel going to take advantage of the situation and increase its presence or its incursion in Syria? Are other countries going to move forward and further complicate the situation, or will the situation be simply resolved as per international resolutions? A lot of questions, a lot of different opinions and analyses, and this is what we will also discuss with our guests in our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the Delhi Chalo agitation that has been going on by the farmers. We all know that the farmers and the BJP government don't really see eye to eye. There have been various skirmishes in the past as well. There have been resolutions and meetings and agreements. Then the government has backed down on the agreement and the farmers have restarted their protest. Now again is another protest, the Delhi Chalo protest, and this is perturbing the government. Although they are taking a lot of stringent moves to thwart this movement, will they be able to do so in the end? To add to this is also the human rights situation in India, in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and of course India's transnational terrorism that is raising a lot of eyebrows since quite some time. Will India be able to maneuver it or to their benefit as it has in the past? Only time will tell, but we will discuss that in our second story. Then we are going to talk about the International Anti-Corruption Day that is being observed across the world as well as in Pakistan today. Our President and our Prime Minister both have issued important statements, and of course the theme of the day this year is uniting with youth against corruption, shaping tomorrow's integrity, focusing on the role of the youth in anti-corruption efforts. And of course in Pakistan we have a majority of youth, so that becomes even paramount. This is the lineup for today. Let's begin with our first segment, and that concerns the situation as far as Syria is concerned. We've talked a lot about Palestine, but now Syria is the country that everybody is talking about because of the rebel incursion that began some time back. The rebel incursion was always there. Of course, the civil war was there since the last 13 years in Syria, but it's gained steam in the last few weeks, and now the rebels have gotten a hold of Syria, and Bashar al-Assad has left for Moscow. We've been joined by two guests online. Let me introduce them to you one by one. Matthew Bryza, former White House official, joins us online. Matthew, thank you very much to have joined us. So has Arnaud Develay. He's an international jurist and political consultant who joins us from Syria. Arnaud, thank you very much to have joined us. I'll begin with you, Matthew. Joe Biden is taking credit for the fall of Assad in his remarks. He says that support from Iran, Hezbollah and Russia collapsed because all three of them are far weaker today than they were when he took office. Washington also has a lot of concerns about to work on who is going to rule Syria next, and what is going to be the strategy from their side. What is the US position as far as this current situation that is evolving in Syria is concerned?
Thanks so much, Khalid. Thanks so much for letting me be here with you. The first part of Biden's statement is absurd. The second part is correct. It is because of actions that weakened Hezbollah and Iran and Russia that Hayat Tahrir al-Shams was able to launch very successfully, more quickly and more successfully than anybody expected, this operation that it had long planned. But what's incorrect about Biden's statement is, first of all, he really had no Syria policy whatsoever. There are 900 troops sitting in Deir al-Zur. There's no other real policy. For months, his approach to Israel had been based upon trying to push Israel to show restraint, both condemning Israel for its massacre, slaughter, genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, but also pressing Israel to stop the fighting in Lebanon. and to find a ceasefire. So it's not like Biden had this strategic concept whereby he thought, and Russia weakened itself through its disastrous war in Ukraine. So it's not like Biden had this grand strategy saying, let's do these three things to weaken the outside interveners so that there can be a downfall of Assad. So what is the U.S. policy right now? Well, his administration issued to me a sort of a naive statement saying, I pray this is the way it will end up, but it's, too early to say something like this, which is, all the various political elements in Syria need to come together and chart the course of their country's future. Yeah, that's what we want to have happen. But what we want or at least what I would want from Washington is a sense of how to make that happen when Russia and Iran are suffering the huge strategic defeat in the Middle East. Turkey is left as maybe potentially a big influential player. And then Donald Trump has said, as you saw, he tweeted on Truth Social, don't do anything. This is not America's fight, meaning Syria. He's wanted to get U.S. troops out of Syria for a long, long time. So there really is no clear U.S. approach that I can see on the horizon to Syria. And so there's a big vacuum. And I think probably Turkey is going to try to play a major role.
All right, Turkey might play a major role. Arnaud, Develay, I'd like to understand, is the situation more complex than it looks to be, or will the solution be simpler and evolving as time goes by? What are you predicting as far as the current situation in Syria is concerned? And of course, I'd like to also understand, a lot of people were extremely happy with the rebels taking control of Syria. What is the basic consensus amongst the Syrian public?
Well, first of all, I'm not in Syria, I'm in Moscow, but I lived in Syria up until 2022 for a couple of years. Well, suffice it to say that the economic embargo on Syria the last 14 years has taken a toll on the population. And to the extent the one-third, northeast third of the country, the most fertile part of the country, was literally confiscated by an alliance of Kurdish militias and the US. Was difficult under those circumstances for Bashar al-Assad to provide the bare minimum in as far as furnishing gasoline to his army and provide bodies and grain to feed his own people. So over time and pending the idea that if we go back to the March 2020 ceasefire negotiated in Moscow between Ankara and Putin, basically the ball was in Bashar al-Assad's camp and trying to somehow alleviate the economic suffering of his own population. But bearing on the circumstances which I described, and this is referred to the Jeffrey Doctrine, which, notwithstanding who sits in the White House, has been U.S. policy in Syria going back to at least 2015, 2016. The idea is to prevent the authorities in Syria from politically somehow win the day after the military victories, bearing on liberating about 77% of the country. 83% of the population lived in government-controlled areas, but to the extent they were not seeing an improvement in their daily lives, it became increasingly difficult to contemplate a situation where the government would maintain itself. And so some would say that mistakes were made. Maybe the overtures claimed by Erdogan, which were not taken on by Assad, might have played a role in the current situation. He himself somehow felt compelled to press on the military card to try to force the issue. Erdogan has about 5 million Syrian refugees in Turkey, on account of which he lost local intermediary elections the last few years. And he was looking for a solution with Assad. But Assad basically said, I'm not going to sit down and initiate a normalizing process unless Turkey withholds and pulls all its troops out of Syria proper. So this was a quagmire. We can add to this the structural, one would say, contradiction within the Syrian state itself, which is, nothing but a monolithic structure. with a lot of clannish factions and rivalries, all predicated on a confessional division of influence. And we have what happened, essentially. A lot of the most competent military officers who served valiantly and liberated all the provinces from 2015 to 2019, late 2019, were essentially demobilized and sent back to their villages to attend to their families, which they earned. And they were replaced by conscripts with almost no experience. We know also from the Iranian Foreign Ministry that some reports, intelligence reports, were communicated to Syrian authorities, if not going back to the end of summer, at least from October, bearing on the suspicious movement of militants, materials being pulled in.
I'll take your word there, and I'll go to my guest who's arrived in the studios, Dr. Zafar Nawaz, Jaspal, international affairs expert. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, to have come in the studios. Dr. Saab, as Arnaud Develay points out, talks about the Jeffrey doctrine, talks about quagmire that is, that is the current situation as far as Syria is concerned, and a monolithic structure. We know that Bashar al-Assad is in Moscow. We know that this seems to be the end of the Assad regime after more or less 5 decades. What do you foresee as far as Syria is concerned in a very complex regional strategic game that is being, or strategic maneuvering that is happening since the last few years? And do you foresee more of strategic maneuvering in the months to come or in the weeks to come as far as Syria is concerned? Do you feel the situation is going to become more complex with time? Will there be stability or not?
First is that when we look about the Syrian situation, 3 person statements are very significant. Prime Minister British, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the President Biden. That reflects that the entire, you can say, rebellious process was engineered covertly by them. That's why they are celebrating their victory. On the other side, yes, Russia is now shelved. Russia tried to maintain its 2 bases in Syria, and one it negotiated with Sudan. The moment the negotiations were, or memorandum of understanding was completed, civil war started and it was shelved, and now here it was shelved as well. Russia has been compromised because of the Ukraine. It is now dependent for troops, for weapons from the other state, for this asymmetrical warfare. Iran, which was a bigger sport to Assad, that was again checkmated. Hezbollah is not there. Now, naturally, his power was already curtailed. As one analyst was also very rightly pointing out now in your program, that when he said sanctions, sanctions proven that Assad's armed forces were eaten by worm, wood eaten by worm. People were dissatisfied, and that's why when the rebels started moving toward Damascus or the other, they started just leaving aside. They were not receiving their salaries, they were not energetic, and they were also in a fatigue, long-term battle fatigue, and not getting. And finally, he was a representative of 10% or 13% population. The remaining population is there. Now, your final question is how I'm looking. I think that these proxies or this rebellion worked well. Assad is out, but its political processes have always a spillover impact. One cannot rule out its spillover impact on the neighborhood. So neighboring sheikdoms must be careful. They have to revisit their policies, though they were saved from the Arab Spring, but they have to revisit. Second is, these groups are number of the groups, warlords. So Syria will be again in a sectarian crisis, sectarian conflict, if they manage it or they are able to manage it. This leader, according to the reports, he was an associate of Al-Qaeda. So, though this organization or lead organization presented itself that they are going to do the governance, but that is, if the West is celebrating on the ex-Al-Qaeda associate's success, I think there is something different to think. Americans launched the strikes, germinating the impression that they wanted to prevent the Islamic states. Whether these strikes were a replica of Gaddafi's strikes in October 2011 or they were real. They were the strikes to curtail the Assad's power and then make him to leave or die. So, in this context, there is a lot of complexities and confusion. But my understanding is that yes, this Shati arc has been now compromised, Hezbollah compromised, Assad is no more there, but it will be not ending the complexity in the region. The region will be more, you can say, fragmented.
All right.
Within the Syria, these rebels will fight, where the Kurds will go, where the Iranian, Turkey will go. Turkey was asking Assad to negotiate so that these people must, 3 million plus people, Syrians should go back. There are a lot of challenges, it's not easy. All these kind of the coups or dictators or whatever you can call it, when they are replaced by rebellions, it is always having a long term.
All right.
And the region is already on the power cut.
All right. Long-term effects, and of course the region is going to be embroiled in more and more of a complex situation as the days pass by, says Zafar, Nawaz, Jaspal. Matthew, I'd like to come to you and understand when you talk, when Dr. Saab talks about the spillover effect, and of course the fragmentation and the confusion and the complex situation that Syria presents the whole region with. What is the role of Israel? Although on the one hand they have really celebrated the rebels entering Syria and taking hold of it, we also know that Israel has taken hold of a certain part of Golan Heights, but this is something that has been going on since 1967. What is Israel's intention vis-a-vis Syria in your point of view? Do they want to establish some kind of a presence in Syria, more of an established presence in Syria? Do they want to further their whole concept of greater Israel in the Middle East? What's your take on this situation?
Sure. Well, first of all, I don't see Israel rejoicing, and certainly in the West, Dr. Jaspal said that there's rejoicing in the West that this former piece of Al-Qaeda has taken over. No, if you watch the news reports in Washington or in New York or anywhere across the U.S., there's a sense of foreboding to a certain extent, because nobody knows whether or not HTS is no longer what it used to be. Everything that Gillani has said so far sounds good and moderate, and he says don't seek revenge, and if people flee, let them flee. He's been careful to dress in sort of, let's say civilian style clothing. And as President Joseph Biden said yesterday, the words are good, but now we have to judge by the actions. So there's a lot of concern about where things are going to go, whether HTS has changed its objectives, and whether it can hold together some semblance of government when there are so many other militias, as both of our other guests have noted, that are competing with each other. So when it comes to Israel, I think the objective is pretty clear. Israel's got enough on its plate right now. It doesn't have aspirations to occupy wide swaths of Syria, but it does seek to create a buffer between its occupied area in the Golan Heights, so Majd al-Shams and that whole front line, and then the rest of Syria in the context of what I just described, which is a new Syria without central authority that is going to be ruled, it seems like, at least by a former branch of Al-Qaeda and or other militias if they can come together. So in my interpretation, it's a defensive move by Israel to say, nobody can control that area on the other side of the Israeli border or the occupied Golan Heights. So we're going to take that into our hands. Now, I get uncomfortable when the Israeli authorities say this is just a temporary move, because that's what they always say, and then they're still occupying so much territory. But that's the Israeli goal. And similarly with Turkey, in case we don't get to it, Turkey has no designs on occupying wide swathes of Syrian territory, but they do want what Erdogan calls a safety zone in northern Syria with the YPG, PKK, what Turks call terrorists, pushed eastward across the Euphrates, so that becomes an area that cannot launch terrorist attacks into Turkey. And is an area then, I think, as Mr. Develay said, to which Syrian refugees can return.
Talking of refugees, I'll take the last point from Matthew. Talking of refugees, what is the situation vis-a-vis the people, those who have shifted from one area of Syria to the other, those who have gone to other countries? What is going to be their fate? Will the United Nations and other important international agencies intervene as far as the safety of these people is concerned? What do you predict as far as the basic civilians in the region is concerned, and how important will the role be, or could the role be, of maybe the UN, maybe the Arab League, maybe other important organizations to bring some sense of stability in Syria or in the region?
Arnaud. If that's a question to me, I would say that the United Nations has not been able to broker a successful political outcome, right? It's tried for a decade and a half. That cleared the way for Russia, Iran, and Turkey to have the so-called Astana process, an alternative to the UN process. I think that, first of all, where the vast majority of refugees who have left will return to is the north of Syria, not exclusively, but it's Turkey that will play the big role there. And the question is, who's going to pay? The United Nations doesn't have, massive funds that are available to rebuild. It does have money available for humanitarian assistance, but that's short term, and the UN does a great job at that, but it doesn't reconstruct. And so that's a giant question that needs to be answered, right? Who's going to pay for the reconstruction? And only then do you know where all of these displaced persons can return, whether they're internally displaced inside of Syria, of which there are, I think, 12 million who have left, and another 7 million inside of Syria that are displaced. So the big first question is who is going to pay to rehabilitate where they live? The UN should and could provide short-term assistance, but I don't think it can broker a political agreement. It's going to come down to, I think, some issues of raw political might and military might. And so we'll see Turkey playing a big role. I don't see the US playing much of a role because Trump wants to get out. So Turkey, maybe the UN will be able to negotiate something, but the key is going to be whether or not there can be some semblance of a coalition of these disparate militias that can establish a form of governance. And I'll say yesterday, the fact that the prime minister so courageously remained behind and now has said, okay, he wants to keep the state apparatus going until there can be a transfer of power, that's a very, very good sign.
All right, a very good sign. Transfer of power in this whole, scenario of transfer of power, Dr. Zafar, Nawaz, Jaspal, where does that leave the terrorist elements? You've mentioned ISIS and others. How is the fight against such elements going to be reconfigured following the fall of the Assad regime?
Everyone, including Turkey, Saudi Arabia, or the regional actors, are advising them that they must have an inclusive government. But how is it possible? It's a coalition of rebels, and then there are other groups as well. So definitely, for a pie of the Damascus, they try to fight with each other. Yes, if their handlers are manageable or they are able to manage them, maybe there will be some good news. But generally, these kind of the groups, they are useful. They play role, but they lack this, you can say, capability to accept each other, compromise on their areas. But of course, the Prime Minister and basically it's this time, the Assad regime, when the rebels started in the last two, they were already, his military, the other people, they were fatigued of it, and they started opening up, and Prime Minister and the government functionaries seems that they were fed up that the guy Assad is not going, and the Russian support was not there, Iranian support was not there, the Hezbollah fighters were not there, so they accepted. So in this context, I think that stability, we desire, we wish stability shall be there, but it will be a distant reality.
All right. Stability could be a distant reality. My last question is to the both of you, Matthew as well as Arnaud, Develay, and I just want short one phrase responses to the both of you regarding the future of this current complex strategic situation evolving in Syria. What do you predict is going to happen in the next, say, 30 days? I'll start with you, Matthew.
I think Al-Gillani will try to hold together the coalition we were just talking about. I think he's got Afghanistan in mind. He knows that the Taliban regime has been totally isolated internationally, no recognition, and money frozen, and he wants to avoid that. So that's what he's going to try to do. Look moderate, hold the coalition together, and I think that is going to be one of the most challenging political tasks in the entire Middle East for a decade.
All right, Arnaud, your take. What do you foresee?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic. We have the jurisprudence of Iraq and Libya, especially Iraq, where we saw immediately the chasm between sectarian communities. And so we can expect a lot of settling the scores, unfortunately, to be taking place. And I don't anticipate Syria to remain a united entity. I see it being partitioned. Along what lines, I don't know, but it will not remain as it is, notwithstanding the wishful thinking bearing on elections and coalition government.
All right. Thank you very much to both of you, Arnaud, Develay, as well as Matthew Bryza, to have joined us online and to have given us your valuable input as far as the current situation, the evolving situation in Syria is concerned. I'll ask you the same question. What is your take on all of that, and what will be the role of the neighboring countries and friendly countries as far as this whole situation is concerned? You said it's more complex than looks through the eye. What could you predict for the coming weeks, say a month or two?
Look, the first issue will be that the Israeli tanks have started rolling. They try to extend their illegitimate, you can say, expansion of the territory. From Gulwan border, they will be going further. They had already captured this buffer zone and they are moving ahead. That will be having a reaction. Second is, they are not going to fight an organized force. These groups maybe some are cooperative with them. Assad, I read in the newspapers that the Israelis striked and all the missiles and all these, his striking power was destroyed. Definitely, but these rebels will be not able to make any inclusive government because courts will be different. The Turkey group will be different.
Okay.
ISI and Americans will be different. Americans are in those areas where there is oil. They are not going to leave. I think that the neighboring countries, of course, desire immediate peace more. Even the Saudi Arabia, they tried to accommodate the Assad for stability, but he failed because of this civil war. The Western powers are giving the examples of the Afghanistan. They failed to realize Taliban are getting, in the name of humanitarian, lot of money. 2 canals are built. Not by the Taliban money, it's by the World Bank money. So what kind of the things they are talking about? So this regime, this current group and the leader is enjoying the support of the Western powers. Definitely you will get funding and some kind of a thing. But despite this, whether other groups will be accommodated, because the past experience of Iraq, Libya reveals that both of these states' experiences reveal instability.
Instability. I'll take that word as the key word for the current situation that we see evolving in Syria. Thank you very much, Dr. Zafar Nawaz, Jaspal Sahab, to have come all the way to the studios and to have given us your point of view. This is a situation that that is becoming more complex in my point of view, and I'm sure you agree with me as well. With time goes by, I just hope it becomes a more stable situation as time goes by. Thank you, sir. Let's come to our second story, and that concerns India and the Delhi Chalo agitation. A strong resistance has already begun as far as the Narendra Modi government is concerned. The whole issue between the farmers and the BJP government is something that has been going on since quite some time. We've seen the different protests that the farmers have had in the past years as well. We've seen that the Indian government has tried to quash them one way or the other through negotiations or through force, and the only way that has worked is negotiations. But whenever there are negotiations and a proper solution to this issue, at least a temporary solution, there's always some bottleneck that happens, and of course the situation again goes back to zero. And the fact also remains that it's just not the farmers' protest, but it's also this whole protest is part of a very, very big picture as far as the destabilization or instability within India and in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. There are just different chapters that kind of combine together to portray a very negative picture of India as far as the basic human rights and basic values are concerned. We've been joined by two guests, one in the studios and one online, to discuss more on that in the studios. We've been joined by Dr. Syed Mujahid Gillani. He's a Kashmiri leader. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, to have joined us.
Thank you, Omar.
And online, we've been joined by Dr. Shabana Fayyaz. She's an international affairs expert. Dr. Saiba, it's a pleasure to have you here as well. We'll begin with you, Dr. Saiba. Dr. Saiba, let's talk a little bit about this farmers' protest that is happening in Delhi as we speak. This Delhi Charo March. What are the primary demands of the farmers that are or not different from the previous marches that the farmers have held?
Thank you so much, Omar Khalid Saab, for picking up this issue. This is a very, very vital issue. And I think this is one of the issues that remains not only of India, but across the world, specifically of the agrarian societies, like even in Pakistan we have and in other countries. So coming to the farmers issue strike, it goes back to 2 years. That became that is the latest phase you can see, say, of the whole movement, but it goes back to the 90s. And 1900s, and later on in 1920s, and then pre-partition, and then later on stages. The crux of it is that it's against the Modi government 3 laws that they were imposed earlier. That is the fair pricing, the loans, and the empowerment. So these 3 have been changed and are trying to be, the markup that was supposed to be given, the subsidy that was supposed to be given, and the loans. That according to this, the demand is to write off these loans and to get this, instead of soft loans, and the right of the complete loans that exist, and also to give the ownership rights. And so this is what it is. So that is the basic crux of it. They are basically against the central government decision, started with the Bihar, and it is trying to, I would like to, if you allow me to add here, is that 2 years earlier, the more than 700 casualties were reported. When almost a year stretch, this movement was there, and they were sitting on the roads, and of course the tractors and others were halted, and but still no viable solutions could have been found. So that is why it is again reigniting the whole society. And of course, we all know the breadbasket is Punjab, of the like in case of us as well, there in India and the other states. So that is the major threat to the whole issue of food security, especially the grain availability that impacts the whole of India.
All right. Dr. Saab, there is one thing as far as food security is concerned. There's another thing when it also concerns human lives and their security as well. I was just going through a recent APHC statement that asked the European Union and the OIC to come up with a tangible policy and implementable policy as far as exerting pressure on the BJP-led government is concerned when it comes to the minorities. This whole farmers issue is just part of a bigger picture when it comes to the BJP government and how it is dealing with the minorities. Will such protests, will statements like the APHC has given, will the West finally collectively wake up and take the necessary implementable action when it comes to the situation of minorities in India?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Omar, for taking me on this very important issue and actually including this particular conflict zone on a day that is internationally recognized. You see, as far as the International Committee is concerned and the issue of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, or the state of Jammu and Kashmir in general is concerned, we must understand that statements, dossiers, repeated claims, all these are very important, particularly in the lives of nations who are still incarcerated, who are still living under slavery, such as that of the Kashmiris under the Indian hegemony. We must understand that the statements that have been issued by all parties Hurriyat Conference from the ground are once again a reminder to the world that they had promised freedom to the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The freedom to the right to life, the freedom to the right to religious freedom, and the right to vote, to basically decide whether they want to join Pakistan or India. That is the fundamental question that still lies unanswered today. And I believe this reiteration of the statements, this repetition of the claim, this is something that the world needs to understand, that even today the human rights violations actually have escalated to organized war crimes by the Indian terrorist forces on the ground. It has not happened that the people on the ground have been given their rights. It has not happened that the people on the ground are actually casting vote in terms of right of self-determination. So even today, the conflict of Kashmir remains frozen at the time that we had on the 5th of January 1949.
All right, Dr. Shabana, Fayyaz, conflicts, whether it be that of farmers, whether it be that of illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, whether it be that of the minorities in India, this makes a lot of conflicts for a country that calls itself the greatest democracy or the largest democracy in the world. Don't you feel that it is the role of important partners of India, or the Western nations that are cooperating or collaborating with India to also in parallel tell them to make their to correct the issues that are prevalent in their own house? Or do you feel that there is a certain blind eye or deaf ears that is deliberately an attitude that is deliberately going on as far as whatever is happening in India is concerned, because it serves their greater purpose? What's your take on that? Because I've asked you this question before as well, but when you look at the different kinds of conflicts, from the farmers community to the Dalits, to the Muslims, to the Sikhs, and to the Christians and different areas of India, it boils up to be a huge number of conflicts happening in one single country. What's your take on that?
Well, that is really is a very broad question, and very well worded, I must say. You combine so many themes into one to make it a more analytical. And I really believe the challenge of any state is how to manage the minorities. And the minority does not mean that you are a minority by religion. It is also a minority by profession. It is also a minority by your education standard. It is also a minority of your sense of empowerment, whether it is gender or the children or any other, even the elderly. They are less empowered when they grow elder. Now, in case of India, what happened is that, on one side is these challenges, and basically the minorities are to be protected according to the Constitution of India, because it is declared constitutionally to be a secular state. Now, to be a secular state, you need religion does not define you. So, and even your race does not define you. But what is happening is that it is not only, let's say you say that Pakistan says this or other country says this. It is the United Nations report say this, that are the most credible one. It is the international well-worded organizations say the reports. That India being the massive...
Shabana, Dr. Genocide Watch that has taken out a very important and alarming report as far as the situation in India is concerned.
Yes. So all these are saying it, but why there is no pressure on it? This is very simple question. To me, as a security analyst, or I feel that the strategic values of the world, its partners, are not coinciding with the human standards that needs to be followed in one of their partner countries. And this is exactly the case wherever the win-win situation is created on the basis of material interest, on the basis of hardcore security interest, rather than the holistic or the broader security interest of the universe or the humankind. And I feel that because since it is as long as India continues to serve as the economic vibrance to the strategic weight of the countries, the West especially, they are not going to pressurize India to have more of a real actions against the violations that are taking place in its ground.
All right, so that makes the situation entirely complex and also more alarming as far as the future of the whole region, including Pakistan and other countries, is concerned. Dr. Saab, coming to you, the All India Majlis-e-Ittihadul Muslimin leader Asaduddin Owaisi condemns the recent claims against Muslim religious sites. We know that different attempts have been made by the government in India to desecrate mosques in the name of the fact that they claim that there were temples at this very place hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and that is why these mosques need to be desecrated, and of course on their place we need to construct temples. That brings us back to the whole Babri mosque incident as well. When it comes to the Muslim identity in India, what do you foresee as the future of this identity, Muslim, Christian, Dalit, in the coming years, if India is given the free rein that it is being given?
Well, Umar, when we talk about Muslims in the Indian Dominion, more or less 14 or 15% of the total population of the whole India. But the point is that even with this minority, the total number of Muslims living in India is more or less almost equals to a number third or a number fourth in the world as far as the Muslim population is concerned. And when this is encountered into, we must understand that the right to religious freedom is very important. Unfortunately, over the past 6 to 7 years, particularly during the Modi regime, we have seen that the Muslims have been made into a stateless state, kind of a position. We saw the bills such as the CAB, the Citizenship Amendment Act, and then it turned into the bill. This was something that actually put the Muslims of India in a very difficult position. And then as far as the ethno-nationalism that is prevalent in the mainland India now, dividing into you and us, that is the Hindutva driven people and the Muslims or the minorities living over there. And we see the effect of it, the communalism that has not only affected the Muslims of India, but also the others. See the Christian communities that are essentially living in the northern India, as well as the Muslims in different states of India are just being subjected to torture. They're being maimed, incarcerated, or even murdered, even if they carry beef or even if they eat beef. This is one of the intolerance levels ultimately that we see in the mainland India, that it is actually turning into a state that is completely driven by Hindutva goons and completely driven by an ideology that only the people who follow the Hindutva ideology can stay in this country, and the others either need to be driven out or they need to be murdered.
All right. Thank you very much to both of my guests, Dr. Syed Mujahid Gillani in the studios and Dr. Shabana Fayyaz online, to have given us the time, to have given us a very able point of view as far as this whole situation is concerned. And of course, there are economic, political and strategic implications of all of this. Finally, before we leave you, the International Anti-Corruption Day is being observed today. The theme is Uniting with Youth Against Corruption, Shaping Tomorrow's Integrity, which focuses on involving youth in anti-corruption efforts. And I think it's very commendable to involve the youth in this. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new stories, segments that pertain to us, you in Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.